Hello everyone. So we're gonna quickly go over the questions in the review quiz 6, which some of you might have already taken. So this particular quiz is actually covering the questions from evolution, um, mainly the evidences and mechanisms of evolution. So the first question that you see here is the scientific theory of evolution is supported by different types of evidence. The diagram below how the skeletons of two different animal species. Um, so how does comparing the skeletons of these animals provide support for the scientific theory of evolution? So what you see here is there are two animals. They are not to scale, and you can see the labels, the pelvic bone, right here, and the veil don't have a pelvic bone showing outside, but they have some rudimentary structures here, and the veil do have flipper, and you can see the skeletal part right here, and pretty much it is showing the internal anatomy. So now let's look at the question. So question is asking how does the comparing skeleton of these animals provide support for the scientific theory of evolution? So the best answer here is it shows the possible common ancestry between organisms because they do share, though they live in a two different habitat, they do share internal anatomy the same, but they have modified structures to perform their functions, and this is called homologous structures. So you can see that they have rudimentary hind limb, which is considered to be highly developed in their ancestor's body, and so that's why this is the correct answer. Question 2. According to fossil records, the horses lived in 50 million years ago were much smaller, weaker, and slower than modern horses. Which processes is most likely responsible for the changes that have led to increase in size, strength, and speed in horses? The best answer is evolution by natural selection. So the other three has nothing to do with evolution pretty much. Um, though inbreeding is a part of is a factor that influences evolution, but the best answer here is natural selection. So natural selection choose the winners and losers in the environment when it changes. So over time, um, the one with the favorable traits will be selected. Now we have two embryos right here, bird and reptile. And the question is asking which of the following can be determined by observing these embryos shown in this diagram. And the bird and reptilian embryo, they at the early stages of their development, they appear to be the same. So we conclude that they evolutionists conclude that, excuse me, they both belong to the common ancestor. So they came from the common ancestor because they both share certain characters at the early stages of their development. Now we are comparing the three hominid species skull, gorilla, Homo erectus, and Homo sapiens. And the question is asking, so pretty much when you compare that, so you can see in the questions, so I hope you read it already. Jaw muscles mutated and may have led to the more graceful human jaw that we see today. The diagram below shows the skulls of three hominid species. So, which statement below more closely associated or explain the link between the jaw size and hominid evolution? So, what link that you can say the best explanation out of these options are the jaw of hominid changed over time due to change in the brain size. So, since we moved to the Homo sapiens and they have highly developed brain, and the brain developed and that changed the jawbone. According to evolutionists. So now scientists are studying the evolutionary history of a group of plants in the United States, and they developed an evolutionary tree, as you see here, species one, two, and one thing you have to understand when you look at this cladogram right here. So one and two, they are from one common branch right here. They are branched from this, and the 3 and 4 is branched from this, 4 and 5 is branched from this, and the species 3, 4, 5, 6 have one common branch right here, then species 7 and 8. So which statement can be inferred from the evolutionary tree that you see here? The best option right here is species 5 is most closely related to 6 because you can see that the 5 and 6 they have a common ancestor somewhere here, which even though it is not showing here, they are branched off from one particular the line of evolution that you see right here. The other options do not give that closeness, and the first one is 1 and 8 is right all the way on two ends. They are completely separated, so that's why. Number six, one of the accepted scientific theories describe the origin of life. Earth is chemical evolution. According to the theory, which of the following events would need to occur first for life to evolve? For the basis of life is organic molecules. So the first, the organic molecules need to be synthesized from inorganic molecules. So that is why this is the correct answer. Photosynthesis and all that comes later, very, very, very later part of the biological evolution. Which type of organisms developed first due to early environmental conditions on Earth? The first formed organisms are prokaryotic and anaerobic, and then it then became aerobic organisms. Then and eventually the evolution happens. Now, question eight, talking about Miller and Urey experiment in 1953 was designed to test the hypothesis that lightning supplied the energy needed to turn atmospheric gases into organic molecules such as amino acids. Which of the following describes why the Miller and Urey theory is widely accepted today? It is pretty much Miller and Urey created the early atmosphere in their lab, and so it is accepted because the process of synthesizing organic molecules from a mixture of gases has been successfully modeled in the laboratory. So what they did is, and when they did this experiment, they could create organic molecules like amino acids and sugars and those type of complex organic molecules. They made it from inorganic molecules when they created an early Earth's atmosphere in a closed experiment. So what do you see here is a diagram below shows the proposed theory of origin of eukaryotes called endosymbiosis. The question is, which of the following explain why cells that contain mitochondria-like organisms had an evolutionary advantage? Because you can see these mitochondria-looking organisms, when they live in there, they were able to make more use of available energy. So they could pretty much break down the complex organic molecules and then release the energy, and so they can perform more work, like how mitochondria is working in our body. Question 10. Over time, the climate of an island became drier, which resulted in changes in the population of various island finch species. Finch population with a certain beak shape thrived, while those not having that beak shape decreased. So, which of the following describe the necessary condition for these changes in the finch population to occur? It's because the limited beak variations, because since they couldn't eat whatever the food which is available, and then they died out, so they didn't have much variations or different characters in that population. Number 11, which of the following would have been least effective natural selection in subspecies of giraffes that is geographically isolated from other giraffe? It is chromosome number. Chromosome number don't necessarily have any effect, but the function that those giraffe do in that particular area, which is a niche and existing predators and available food sources, those are the factors definitely control the evolution of that newly isolated giraffe in that new geographic area. Question 12. Mutation within the sequences are actually natural process that produce genetic diversity. Now remember, mutations is always natural and it happens randomly, and but natural selection happens all the time, and mutation is completely random component, though it happens all the time, but it will most of the time it will be repaired. Which of the following best illustrate natural selection? An organism with a favorable genetic variation will tend to survive and breed successfully. So that is what natural selection is. An organism with a favorable variation. Look at the rock pocket nice example. The one with the favorable variation will pass their alleles to the next generation. Number 14. The small population of chimpanzees lived in a habitat that undergoes no change for a long period. How will the genetic drift probably affect the population? Now, again, genetic drift is a sudden loss of genetic variation in a population. So it could be due to the natural disaster or some man-made disasters. It kill a large amount of population from an area. So what happens when when those organisms are killed, it will reduce the genetic diversity. So that is a correct answer. We're not going to have quite a lot of differences in the population. A small portion of the population that is geographically isolated from the rest population runs the risk of decreased genetic variation because there's not quite a lot of chance for that population to mix. The best example is Amish population. There is not much variation in that because they just live by themselves. They do not marry in or out, and so they're just pretty much inbreeding happening. So there's less genetic variation. Number 16, in Darwin's book Origin of Species, and he said species change over time. Which of the following not of his observation that describes the mechanism of natural selection? Disease and natural disaster will limit population growth. So that is something which he did not mention about that. He did not explain any of those things. An organism produce more offsprings can survive. That was a part of it. And the organism today that came from the ancestors and the organism with a selected advantage will survive and reproduce. Those are the parts of natural selection. Number 17 is talking about genetic screening. So if the question is, if you screen the people for genetic disorders in advance, there's this challenge that we have in the United States, and insurance companies are going to come to know that, hey, this particular person is going to have some kind of problem later. So they're going to drop the patient's medical coverage unless we are not protected by certain law. And so that in current situation, that can be done. So we have to use this technique wisely. All right, question number 18 is talking about animal farming. So it is something like, making a transgenic animals, so like a cow that can produce human milk, or a bacteria can produce human insulin. So what is not true about transgenic animals? Transgenic animals cannot pass their ability to produce the desired drug to its offspring. So when you change the DNA, it passes to the next generation. So it is going to happen, and because since we are editing the genome of the organism, it is going to pass to the next generation through sexual reproduction. Number 19, the question is asking, in October 1990, the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Science and U.S. National Institute of Health began the process of mapping human genome. This process was referred to as Human Genome Project, was intended to identify 20,000 to 25,000 genes in human genome. A working draft of the genome was announced in 2000 and a complete one in 2003. Which of the following describes the main benefit of completing the Human Genome Project? So what we pretty much we track down all the genes in our body that help us to identify the genetically based diseases. Number 20, genetic engineering has both positive and negative outcomes. One of the most common areas where genetic engineering is used in agriculture, and if farmers plant more genetically modified crop, which of the following negative outcomes could occur? It could be a decrease in genetic diversity of the crop. Pretty much they all look kind of same because we are using one particular type of variety of plant. Next is rice is most popular food crop in the world, and we've pretty much successfully grown in certain places. If trends in climate change continue, the areas in the rice currently grows will be significantly reduced. Which of the following is best way that the biotechnology can keep the harvest of rice from decreasing? So what we can do is genetically engineering rice crops that are tolerant to the change in the environment. Like you might have heard about the citrus greening happen in Florida, and the University of Florida is working on genetically modifying those citrus species to fight against that particular condition so they can overcome and protect the farmers. Um, Now, next question 22. The Florida panther was once considered to be subspecies of cougars and given a special trinomial taxonomy, Puma concolor cori. Current scientists, however, have studied for the Florida panthers and removed the subspecies classification to only Puma concolor. Which of the following would most likely explain why the classification of the Florida panther changed? Because we recently added a lot of evidences, new genetic evidence suggests that a much closer relationship between the Florida panther and other cougars. That's why this is the correct answer. Um, Now, question number 23, we're talking about we added the domain to the classification system. So, which of the following is best explanation for why domains are added to the previous system of classification? Some organisms which were previously characterized together were determined to be genetically very different. So, even though the appearance is the same, but they are genetically different. All right, many protists are single-cell organisms, and however, protists and bacteria are different biological kingdom. Which of the following comparisons of protist and bacteria are not true, which is both protists and bacteria can be motile. All right, now coming to the last question, is talking about the cambium. It is a type of tissue that uh, developed into xylem and phloem. So, if the cambium of a particular plant is damaged, what happens is the xylem and phloem cannot be formed in the plant, so plant won't be able to transport nutrients and water. So that is the reason. That is the purpose of cambium. Cambium is something like as a tissue that grow into xylem and phloem. So I know this video is a little bit longer because we had to cover more topic, and I hope this is helpful.